I'm Helen Kay, known in Omaha as Kulikowski. My father changed his name. Marshik, and now I'm Helen Goldman. I was born December 28th, 1933 in San Jose, California. My parents were both born in Omaha, Nebraska. My mother was Ruth Richards, and my father was Seaman Kay, and he was the son of Reuben Kulikowski. Reuben Kulikowski, along with his first cousins, Harry. My grandfather was Reuben Kulikowski, along with his two first cousins, Harry and Louis Kulikowski, ran the Central Market. My major claim to fame in life is that my grandfather, Reuben Kulikowski, invented the Reuben sandwich. And I have more fun with this than anything. I am prouder of this than anything, because lots of people's parents came over, or grandparents on the Mayflower, but very few had them invent a sandwich. And that is his legacy. My grandfather moved to my mother's father, who was Louis Richards, who also lived in Omaha after he had come from Russia. And they got married in 1898, and they moved to San Jose in 1909, and my mother was 6 weeks old. And when my mother was 18, she went to Omaha with her mother, and she met my father, who was only 19 years old, and they fell in love and decided to get married, and therefore my father, Seaman, who then changed his name to Kay, because when he came to California, Harry and Louis had a brother named Joe, and Joe was not in the Central Market. He had his own market and opened it in Berkeley, California. And when he came to California, he decided he did not want to be a Kulikowski. He became a K. So when my father moved here, he also became a K. As we know, in that era, nobody really wanted to keep these long, complicated names, which now they would never change. So my father moved here in 1928, when they got married, and he worked for his father-in-law for a time, which he also had a very successful grocery store. But after it did not work out, because he was allergic to some of the products that they carried, so he left on a very friendly basis. But he then went into the gasoline business, and right in the middle of the Depression. He unfortunately had rheumatic fever when he was a young boy. So he couldn't do many things because his heart valve was affected, and he was not able also to get in World War II, which upset him very, very much. So, but he went to work in a defense plant, and so my mother and he had been married at a very young age, but they were very adventurous, and we kept moving. So we moved from San Jose, first to Cupertino, where he could be closer to the defense plant. And then we moved to Palm Springs, which we live now, in 1944. And he worked at the Palm Springs Air Base. And my father became the hero, which he still is, in my book anyway. There was a flaming truck in 1944 at the air base that was spewing fire, and he knew there was a huge gasoline tank underneath, and he ran through a wall of fire and drove the truck away and received third-degree burns all over. But he got the highest medal ever can be awarded to a civilian for his bravery. But this definitely changed our life, because first of all, the war got over, but he was so ill we had to then move back to San Jose from Palm Springs. and he had to recover. It really took him a year or so to recover. But we had a very happy childhood. Even though we moved a lot, somehow my sister and I have an older sister, Jean, who's 3 years older than I am. And everything was going very well in my life till they decided in 1949 that I was not meeting enough Jewish kids. My sister had already been married, so they decided if they sent me back to Omaha, I would be certain to meet all sorts of wonderful Jewish people. And I did. I stayed with my aunt, Bernice Brodke, my father's oldest sister. And I then met Richard Goldman at Highland Golf Course. And I was 15 and he was just a couple of weeks shy of 20. And we had a romance. I fell in love with him because he had a car. But our romance only lasted 2 weeks because I had to come home. And the age difference was just too much. And for many reasons, we never really were in contact with each other. Never heard of him, saw him or he me for 45 years. And in the meantime, I had gone to Camp Berkeley, and I had met a wonderful man, Herbert Marchik, and been married to him for 37 years, had 2 children, and had become widowed in 1990. And I had been widowed for almost 5 years, and one day a friend of mine said, do I know that Richard Goldman had become a widower and moved to San Francisco? And I said, my God, he dropped me in 1949. I haven't seen him for 45 years. And I called him up the next day, and I introduced myself, and I said, you dropped me 45 years ago, and you owe me. And he came down to San Jose, and before the dessert was really served, we were engaged. And that was 13 years ago. So now my connection came back to Omaha. And when we went to get our marriage license, 3 of our 4 parents had been born in Omaha, so I thought that was kind of unique. My recollections of Omaha really mostly are of the Central Market, and my grandmother was very involved in selling bonds for the war, and we went and helped her. But it was a long trip to go to Omaha on the train in those days, so we didn't go as often. But my father taught us that the Central High Fight song, Sim, was the finest piece of music that was ever written. So I have very fond memories of Omaha. But I must say San Jose is my home, but lots of my family are from Omaha. And I've read so many things. My grandmother kept a scrapbook of everything she had about ever was in the paper about my family or what her doings, and so I have a wonderful history. And I have nothing but kind thoughts of Omaha. I'm going to talk about my grandfather, Louis Richards, who moved from Omaha. Well, first of all, he came over, to begin with, he came over from Russia when he was 12 years old, all by himself. He lived with a family in New York, and that's where he took the name of Richards. His real name was Kulowetsky. So he was in New York, and then he had some family in Omaha, and then he moved there. And like everything of the history, then he brought more of his siblings over once he started doing well. He met my grandmother, or the marriage was arranged, in 1898. And they then started their lives, but somehow I don't really know the exact reason. I've asked my mom why they moved to San Jose, but they did. But my grandmother's sister had already moved to Joe, who was married to Joe Kay. Joe Kay was my father's first cousin, but he married my grandmother's sister. So again, we had the 2 families who got married. And though they had the same surnames, obviously it was my grandmother's sister, which was so close. Anyway, so Louis and Sarah came in 1909, and my mother had just been born, which was their fourth child. And they moved here to San Jose, and he opened up a grocery store. And he was very successful. He sold a lot of wholesale grocery to the different restaurants. He was one of the most charming men. Unfortunately, he was riddled with arthritis, and he was never well. But he always had a twinkle in his eye and a smile on his face, and he loved telling us these corny jokes, which the main one was, today people are dying who have never died before, and I fell for it every day. And he just lived to tell wonderful stories. He made me as a young girl feel I was the prettiest girl that has ever been. I was the most brilliant girl who had ever been, and I was the most special girl. And I have always attributed my self-esteem to my grandfather, who really had me believing all this, which, whether it was true or not, it was just wonderful for me. He had many of his relatives, because he did become successful very quickly, and they had a very large home. All of his relatives were very welcome at his house, and many of them came, and they spent many months living under their roof. And he always felt that's why you have a large home, and when you can share, you can share. And he took such joy in that. He just radiated warmth and sweetness, and I hope that his grandchildren, we all just hope that we would carry that sweetness on. He unfortunately died at a quite young age, but he really had a life of pain from the age of about 40 on, because he was riddled with arthritis, and they did not have good medicine in those days, and he really was basically crippled. So that's why I was able to get such a wonderful relationship, because he retired very young. By the way, he had 3 daughters and a son, and his 2 daughters graduated University of California in their 20s, which I think was quite unusual, but they were very, very much into education. Your son went to college and was a graduate lawyer. They had put very high bars for everybody, but the main thing was his unbelievable warmth and twinkle brought everybody who was in his company to want to sit by his knee and listen to him, because he was so kind and so generous with us, with his time and his money. And I will have great memories of it.